I don't know if there's a filter available.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That's much better. That's shooting through my polarized glasses.
Mm-hmm.
Are you hearing this? I don't suppose you are.
I can hear you.
You can hear this?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, right.
How did can you see the reds on the?
Yeah, with the polarized, it's amazing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's cool.
Good. But those seem cleaner. That's what you're saying. They're cleaner up there than they are down.
I think it's just the way he's looking at it. This is just as good.
Yeah.
Oh, he's recording, so okay. We're recording as well.
Joe, you're recording this, right?
Yes.
I see he's got his recording on. And we're all set here.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We're good.
Ready to go?
So let's give it 2 more minutes, and then we'll kick off.
So Clark is up there, Joe.
Okay.
He's way up. But I'm on my,
Is that about 75 yards or so?
oh, a bit more than that. I would think 150.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should get some sun.
You have no control over this.
Right. Yeah, no.
No.
Just, but it works on the river, so that's kind of
Oh,
cool.
it's great. Yeah.
If anybody's got any toe warmers they can bring us.
I could have put my ski boot once. Yeah, this water's cold. So you're going to actually see a bit of my shadow here, Joe, in the water.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But you should be able to see the red right in front of my head.
I see something. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, much lighter. Yeah. But the only thing we could do is, why don't you come this way a bit? I'll just change this one. Oh, actually, you're still in the picture. So.
Okay. I'm going to get us started here. I'd like to welcome you all to our second live broadcast of a presentation on reds. And we'll introduce the people who are out in the river in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to acknowledge that we have 3 of our CIC volunteers on the call. And we also want to remind you to use the speaker view so you get the maximum image size for the part of the broadcast that's coming from the river. And now I'd like to invite the classrooms and students who are joining us today. So let's start with the BBA classroom. Andrew?
Hello, everyone. This is Andrew MacArthur. I'm here with a class called Outdoor Adventure. Half of us are here and half of us are joining on this this call via Zoom from home. Course is focused on recreational pursuits available to us in our area, and we will be learning fly fishing, fly casting, fishing in general later in the year, or actually I should say next year. And we're excited to check out what you have going on up north. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, Andrew's students who are on the call, could you introduce yourself, please? Unmute and tell us who you are. Jordan, how about you? Want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jordan Jager. I'm a senior at BBA. And I'm in this outdoor adventure class, and it's pretty interesting to be in this call. Never really learned much about fishing, well, trout river fishing before, so.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. Gabriel, how about you?
I'm a freshman at BBA, and it's really great to be here, and I hope to learn a lot.
I think you will. Jason, how about you?
I am a sophomore at BBA, and I've never actually fished, so this should be interesting.
Yes. Now, I'm not sure I know how to pronounce the next name, Nevea.
Hello, so this is Julie Mackey, actually. I'm the other science teacher at Maple Street School. And my class is just returning from recess. So they're just joining us. We participated on Tuesday, and we're really excited to watch. This is our third year participating in Trout in the classroom. So we're really excited to be here today. And these are our seventh grade science class, joining and getting ready to participate. Thank you for doing this.
Dance moves. You're welcome. Now, I'm not sure. I think I butchered someone's name so badly they didn't realize I was asking them to introduce themselves. Nevea.
Vay, are you here right now? Vay is the nickname.
Vay.
Vay. Are you
Okay.
No.
Well, she lost her chance. I want to move on to our team in the field. You see Clark Amadon. Clark, say hi.
Yeah, thanks. Just needed to unmute myself here. Yeah, Clark Amadon, and with the Mad Dog chapter of Trout Unlimited, and here to participate today. I'm the coordinator for our chapter. Excited to be on the river and in the river to participate. So yeah, thanks.
And Ian, could you introduce yourself, but also tell us about your equipment?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ian Sweet. I'm also a Mad Dog member, a member of the council as well. We're standing in the river here, and I'm going to move over. You'll be able to see some cameras we've set up. If you want to switch that in, you're actually looking at the camera, I think. And I'm with our host, who I'm sure will introduce himself.
Cool. Hey folks,
Right.
my name. Ready to go?
Yes.
Cool. This is the first live event I've actually done from the Riverside, so I'm excited to be part of this. My name is Bret Ladago. I'm a fisheries biologist for the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and I manage sort of the central part of our state. So the Winooski watershed, the White River, the Waits, the Onpompanoosic, and the Ottaquechee. And I'm responsible for sort of studying the fisheries in those areas, designating where we want to stock fish like trout that we raise in 5 of our fish culture stations around the state. And then just trying to do whatever I can to conserve fish that so many people go out and enjoy for angling. We did a recent study that said that over 2 million people were actually going out in 2019 fishing in Vermont. So it's a lot of folks that are out on the river and our lakes and ponds. And it's something that people enjoy doing with friends and family, and gives them an opportunity to be outside and enjoy nature. So that's sort of my pitch in that sense. Now I'm going to get into talking about fish, because that's really why we're all here. And that's what I do every day. So we're in the Dog River. This Dog River is part of the Winooski River Basin. So it flows all the way from Cabot, Vermont, down to Lake Champlain in the city of Winooski. And this is one of the tributaries to the Winooski River. And this is a really important tributary that we manage for wild trout. Say that it's trout that has lived its entire life cycle within this river system. So they're born here, they live here for a number of years, they reproduce, and the babies are born, and so the next generation comes after that. So this one's unique that we have a lot of wild trout in the stream. Some of our waters that have been degraded a little bit, they get too warm. Trout need cold water to survive. And so rivers like this that stay cold for most of the year, they can do really well. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about life history of trout that we've got and some things that we see behind us here, which is kind of a unique opportunity. We're just past the season that's open for trout fishing in Vermont. So that ends the end of October. And part of the reason that we have an ending to our trout season is because fish are doing things during this time of year. So they're changing their behaviors. And one thing that some species do is they spawn. So that's where they reproduce in some areas. And it's not all species of fish. Different species of fish have different strategies. Some spawn in the spring. Actually, most species spawn in the spring. But other species spawn in the fall. So I'm going to talk about two species that we have in this river and that are spawning and moving around this time of year. So we've got brook trout and brown trout, which are both salmonids, and they're really popular in the state. They're one of the top 5 most preferred species for people to fish for, and they're beautiful animals. If you haven't had a chance to see a brook trout or a brown trout or any trout species up close, they're really magnificent animals, and they do really well in systems like the Dog River here, where brook trout have been here since really the glaciers receded. So they're one of our 2 native trout species. Brown trout were introduced from Europe back in the 1800s, so they're sort of fish that have been able to survive here and reproduce, and they tend to do okay alongside brook trout, our native species, and they can coexist in river systems like this. So this time of year, when the water temperatures get cold, so when the water temperatures drop below 50 degrees and the daylight gets really limited, those 2 things in combination with flows that increase in the water, it gives these fish cues to move upstream. So these brown trout and brook trout are moving upstream into these areas where they can find really good habitat for spawning. And so usually that habitat is well oxygenated water, cobble or gravel. They don't want it to be too silty. And so these fish will move around until they find these areas, and then they'll pair off. So a male and a female will find one another, and sometimes there can be a little competition. The males tend to get to the spawning area first, followed by the females, and they can be somewhat territorial once they establish an area that they're going to spawn. The females will come in and they create what we call reds. So they use their tails to move the sediment in certain areas that they feel is really good. So somewhere that maybe there's spring water seep that keeps the water temperature nice and cool, or it could be areas where the water current is just right, so it's not going to wash the eggs away, but it also gives them something to cling down to. So right behind me is what they create. So the female will come in on her side and she'll move her tail. And this just doesn't happen in 1 or 2 days. This happens over quite a long period of time. And she'll move her tail enough to move that sediment below because she wants to get rid of all that really fine sediment. If she can be left with cobbles, anything bigger than maybe the tip of your pinky finger, that's going to be really good places for the eggs to be able to stay and survive. So once that area is created, and the temperature and the situation is right, so the water temperature is right, the daylight's correct, and the area, so all those environmental factors have to come together for this to occur. She'll release her eggs. The male will come in, he'll release his milt, and that will fertilize the eggs. So as soon as that egg is fertilized by the milt, there's a process that's called water hardening, where the egg comes from this really porous material. When it first comes out, it's kind of this mushy material. You could almost just crush it with your finger. Once it's fertilized, it actually takes in water and creates a barrier around it. So it becomes actually almost like a little rubber ball, and you can actually take a fertilized water-hardened egg and you can bounce it on the ground and it'll bounce up. And that's a way for the eggs to protect themselves from the surrounding environment. So another unique thing about brown trout and trout is once those eggs are laid and fertilized, they stay there all year or all winter until the next year when they hatch, which is different than a lot of other fish species. The one last thing that the female will do is she'll come in before they leave and she'll put a fine layer of gravel over the nest in order to give sort of the eggs a place to hide and so that they won't be washed away by the current. Other fish do take the opportunity to feed on these eggs. They're a high protein food source, so that will occur. And it's challenging for these eggs to survive an entire winter right here in this area behind us. So if you can see it on the camera, we've actually got a pretty large area here that has gravel. It looks a little lighter compared to the rest of the area. And so if you look a little closer up where I'm at, you can see there's distinct areas that the gravel is a little bit cleaner and it has like this saucer shape. So it's a little bit of an indent, and all that sediment and that dirt has been removed. That's really fine. And so it's left with this cobble and this fine gravel that allows those eggs to sit down and sit there. And they will sit in this area until next spring when the water temperature gets above 50 degrees again. They'll hatch and they'll have to fend for themselves and move around. But there's a lot that can happen in the wintertime. We have ice flows that come through. We have floods. That happens a lot more in the wintertime than it does in the summertime some years. So it's really challenging for these animals to survive and thrive and then get to bigger sizes. So that's one strategy fish have, is they tend to use a lot of energy in creating a lot of eggs. So a larger brown trout may drop up to 4,000 eggs. If 40 or 50 of those survive to be the next generation, then that's really good. They're doing pretty well. So they're a little different than people or other mammals. They use a different strategy and invest all their energy into just creating, one or two or fewer offspring that have the ability to survive. So this red looks like it is covered with a little bit of algae, which to me indicates that it might be a little bit older. So really spawning season, it will start in October, again, when the timing and the temperature is right, and it'll run through sometimes December. And depending on where that fish lives, how far it's traveled, it may spawn at different times. So we may have some that are just starting to spawn now because we've had more water lately. We've had some snow, so now the water temperature is really nice and cold. And so they may be moving in different areas. So it's really depending on where you're looking on the river. Sometimes it's hard to find because it's so dependent on the environmental conditions that are occurring around. So that's sort of the overview that I had for you, a little bit about trout biology. I'm going to be here for a while. I know we're going to go to Clark and talk about what he found upstream. But I'm willing to answer any questions folks have about trout or fishing or anything. So feel free to ask those questions.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bret. That was terrific. So anybody who wants to ask a question should unmute yourself. I want to give precedence to the students and teachers in particular. But before we kick it over to them, Bret, can you tell us the size of the eggs approximately?
The size of the eggs. It depends on the size of the fish to some sense and the species of fish. So generally, the smaller the fish, the smaller the eggs, but that's not always true. So salmonids tend to have larger eggs than a lot of other species. An Atlantic salmon egg might be as large as my pinky nail. Brook trout eggs tend to be a little bit smaller, but that also depends on what time of year. So if folks are out fishing and they catch a brook trout in the spring or the summer, those eggs won't be fully developed. But once the eggs get fully developed, they're not, I would say they're smaller, smaller than, your pinky nail.
And the brook trout that I think our classes get are probably down around, I don't know, smaller than 1/8 of an inch, as I recall.
That sounds
So,
about right.
do we have any students or teachers who want to ask Bret a question?
We would ask a question from BBA, if you don't mind. Yeah, get a little closer so they can see you.
What is the importance of trout?
Like the significance of protecting trout as compared to other species, right? In essence.
Did you hear that, Bret?
I think so. Yeah. Why trout and not other species? There's a lot of different reasons that might be the case. For Vermont, it's a big heritage component. So brook trout have been here, like I said, since the glaciers receded. And so they've provided, first off, a food resource for native populations. Some of our high mountain streams, that is the only species that exists. There's no other fish species up there. And so it was a significant food source for generations of folks, not just the native folks that were here before folks came here from Europe, but also people still today. So they go out and they harvest trout. They're really a nice, delicious food source, but they're beautiful fish. If you've ever seen a brook trout or any trout during spawning season, they're just stunning with the different colors that they have. They're also enjoyable to catch recreationally. So they tend to behave a little differently than maybe catching, say, a white sucker or a carp or some of the warm water species. That's not to say that they're less important. So I don't like saying that they're more important or worth conserving more. All of our native species are the same. It's just that folks tend to prefer these fish for some of those reasons. But from my perspective, all the fish that are native to Vermont deserve to be protected and conserved. It's just that sort of the trout, especially the brook trout, tends to be more of the poster child. We call them charismatic megafauna sometimes. So similar to like polar bears or whales, they get all the attention of all the mammals. But it doesn't mean we still don't care about all those other animals that are there.
Bret, could you talk about how we use the phrase indicator species?
I couldn't quite get that.
Indicator species.
Indicator species. Yeah, sure. So that's a great other point of why trout are important, because they tend to be environmentally sensitive. So when conditions in the environment tend to fluctuate really quickly or change really quickly, they can indicate a problem that we might not be seeing. So if we're out, we've monitored trout populations in a certain stream for 50 years, and then all of a sudden we start to see declines, we know that something's wrong in the environment that we should look at closer, because they show that a response. So they can be that response to what else is happening surrounding them. Frogs are a good indicator species because they absorb a lot of things through their tissues. And fish living in water, if there's something wrong with the water that they're in, they're not going to survive. So if we all of a sudden see declines in populations, it's a really good place for us to kind of hone in on and look at what other things might be causing that issue.
Are there other questions for Bret, or are we ready to move on to Clark?
I have a quick question for him if we're into the old guys segment. The question is, we've been up in a lot of the high mountain streams this fall and seen little to no reds at all. And the size of fish, I guess the question is, what size will the trout, size and age, will brook trout begin to spawn?
Size and age of brook trout who spawn.
Size and age of brook trout. So brook trout are fairly short-lived, so they really only make it to about 5 years old. And generally all a brook trout needs is about 1 year to be able to mature. And sometimes, so they're born in the spring, they start to move, or they're born in the fall, they incubate through the winter time, they hatch in the spring, and then they usually make it to about that big after their first year. So maybe they get to 2 or 3 inches. By the end of that second year, that fall, they can be reproductively ready to spawn. Because if they're only a 5-year-old species, they need to be able to do that. And that's an adaptation they've come up with in order to be able to colonize these areas. And brook trout are really resilient, and they have to be because they live in really extreme environments. If you think about a tiny little brook trout stream up in our mountains that's iced in, and then in the summertime warms up, it's changing water levels. It's a lot that they have to cope with. So yeah, they can spawn as early as 2, but will spawn, and some may survive longer than 5, but that's generally life expectancy is about 5 years old. Brown trout tend to be a little bit longer lived, but they also and also grow to bigger sizes. But that can be a limiting factor in some waters too.
So would now be the time to talk to Clark. I should explain, Clark is upriver about, what did you say, Ian, 150 yards? Ian is pointing his camera in the direction of the upstream area where Clark is, and Clark has some, if he will unmute, there he did, he unmuted
There we go.
He's going to show us some more red.
Yeah, hi folks. I'm probably about 75 yards up around the corner from where Ian and Bret are. I don't think that Ian pans up there, you won't see me, but so here, let me show you another red that's up this way. And there's actually more than one in this little reach. So hold on just a second here, I'll flip my camera around, and there we go. And I'm also going to put some polarization, and sorry to get everybody a little wiggy as I put the glasses in front here, but I think you can see that that there's a lighter section there. So you've got, in the foreground, it's a little darker, and then in the background, it's a little dark, and you can see the bank. And also you can see kind of a white stripe that kind of extends. In this case, it probably is about 8 or 9 feet, probably 2 or 3 feet wide. Now, the interesting thing about this particular red is that a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't here. We've been looking at this stretch for probably close to 6 or 7 weeks, just because it is an area that has had many trout reds in the past. And in this case, this one's appeared in the last 10 days, I think. So, you know, this is an encouraging sign
Right on the corner.
in this particular stretch. So it's really wonderful to be able to see this. Just, I'm not going to walk up there, but I'm just going to pan up, and you'll see probably halfway. Oh, there we go. Halfway down that particular run, there's a couple of other reds. And this one is the one that's the newest. And the gravel here is a little bit cleaner. The algae hasn't built up as much. Yeah, so it's a wonderful phenomenon to be able to see this in the river. The Dog River is fairly unique. For those of you that live down in the Manchester area, Battenkill watershed, are familiar with high quality rivers and streams and wild trout. And the Dog River is a similar kind of resource that we have up here in a unique habitat. So it's wonderful to be able to see more than one or several reds in this particular reach of river. And so, yeah, so we, you know, we're just happy to be able to be out here. Now, there may also very well be another red over in this stretch here. It looks a little bit lighter. Perhaps they're working on creating another area, but this is pretty prime habitat here. The water depth here is probably, close to over your ankles up towards mid calf, and is highly oxygenated. It's just above a riffle, and it's also just below a riffle here. And the riffles are where there's going to be more oxygen entering the water. And that's one of the characteristics that trout are looking for when they develop their eggs, is they don't want to have them in too deep a water or too shallow where the eggs might get stranded. So this is you know, just a real great prime example of habitat that are suitable for trout building reds.
So I'm going to give students and teachers, again, the chance to ask questions of Clark if they're interested. Jordan, why don't you unmute yourself?
I was just wondering, like, how you can, like, what's the difference between the, I don't know, if you know, like the difference between the males and the females, like what do they look like compared to each other?
Can you hear that?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to answer that really briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bret. Typically, the real, the short version of that, Jordan, is that the males are going to be much more highly colored than the females. In some cases, the males will develop a bit of a hook jaw that will kind of come up, called a kype. So the males will be more highly colored, and they will be, and sometimes in some cases, develop this kype. And so I'm going to stop there, and maybe Bret can provide a little bit more background in terms of males and also the females as well.
No, I think those are the main differences. Males in some fish species tend to be smaller than the females, because the females are the ones producing all the eggs. But no, during spawning season in general, fish, at least the males, tend to change color. And sometimes they can just be these vibrant, amazing colors. Even white suckers or long-nosed suckers get this stripe, this red stripe along their side sometimes, or and that can vary by water body too. So different fish in different water bodies, because of the water chemistry or whatever substrate they're in, can be a little bit different colors. But those are the main changes, along with physiological changes. So that time of the year, you know, there's difference in hormones. They also have different, you know, females create eggs and males create the milk. So physiologically and biologically, they're different.
Jordan, I have a picture on my phone of a male brook trout, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but you might be able to tell that the belly of the fish is really kind of a bright orange, and the fins have that, and you can see what Clark talked about there, the kype, the underjaw sort of curves up. Those are classic characteristics of the male in spawning season. Wouldn't be as true of the male the rest of the year. Other questions?
We have a question at Maple Street.
Okay, I was
Go for it.
wondering how many eggs there are per red, and then also like what the optimum height is the depth of the water for the reds.
How many eggs?
How many eggs and what depth of water generally?
Yeah, so it depends on the species and the size of the female. So larger females of a brown trout are going to create more eggs than a smaller brown trout. But usually it can range for salmonids at least, you know, there's going to be at least a few hundred to a larger brown trout may create up to 4,000 eggs. You know, as they're being laid, some of them will get swept downstream. But, you know, they're hoping, their goal is to create a red that's going to hold the most amount of eggs. If they lay too many eggs in a small red and they cover each other up, that can also be an issue because then they might get moldy and they need oxygen to be well circulated. So it's really that balance of the size of the fish, the size of the red, and then what species it is. There's other species like white sucker that create, you know, thousands, or sturgeon create hundreds of thousands of eggs. So it all depends on the species and their reproductive strategy. But that's pretty much the ballpark, at least for salmonids like brown trout.
What about
And in terms of-
survival?
Survival is because they produce so many eggs. That's their strategy. So survival is generally fairly low from egg to that next year of fish. And so that's one of the reasons some fish, you know, like a long-lived fish like a sturgeon produces so many eggs because there's so few that live of the age to reproduce, where brook trout can produce less because there's more of them around. And the survival's still low. That's the lowest survival. As fish get older, their survival kind of increases because they get bigger, they can eat other fish. But eggs, there's a lot that, you know, maybe 10% if they're lucky will survive. And that's something different than hopefully you'll see in your trout in the classroom projects, where the survival rate, if you provide them with the right characteristics, temperature, oxygen, hopefully you'll get a higher survival rate than we would here in the wild.
We tend to average about 50% across the state.
That's great.
So, Bret, I think we had a question as well about water depth.
You don't want the water to be too deep so that silt falls out. So as water gets deeper, more stuff falls out of it. So if they put it in an area like a deep pool where over the winter time it gets silted in, that's no good. That'll kill the eggs. So really, this is about the best water depth. You don't want it too shallow so that the egg gets swept away. But, you know, anything 4 to maybe 8 inches deep is usually what you'll see. Bigger fish may go a little bit deeper just because they're a little more vulnerable and exposed when they're creating their reds. But yeah, usually at least 4 inches, anything up to maybe a foot.
Now, Bret, when Clark was talking to us, he pointed out at least 3 or 4 reds in the same area. I assume that those are different mating pairs. Is that correct?
It could be. It's hard, you know, without seeing the fish there, it's hard to tell. It could be that maybe one pair tried a spot and didn't work, and so they moved to the next spot that was a little more comfortable. But I think even down here, usually reds are created in sort of a saucer type shape. So they're very round because that's just when their tails are moving and the sediment's moving, that's what it creates. So it's not unrealistic to see several small reds in a certain area, and it could be multiple pairs. They do tend to get territorial, but if they also all find the right spot, then they will mate next to one another. If that's the best area around to go, then they'll deal with that competition for a while. So I think in there and even here, we're seeing multiple pairs that are probably spawning in the same area.
Now, Ian, I know that you have a GoPro. Is that something that you'll be able to use in this situation?
Yes, but unfortunately, to put my GoPro underwater, and put it on this stream, I need to hardwire it. And that
I see.
is not impossible. So when we reproduce this show and put it on your YouTube channel, I'll put in some underwater shots to talk about, to show what Bret has been talking about.
That's great. We really appreciate that. So we have time for a few more questions or comments from the audience. And now we're opening up to everybody. Barry?
Yeah, you were talking about pairs, mating pairs of brook trout. I've watched a number of different species of fish spawning, and at least for silver salmon, it's usually not one male, but several males that'll be hovering around the female until she lays her eggs, and then several of them will be fertilizing them. Does that happen with brook trout as well?
Yeah, I think that's sort of part of that whole courting process where the males tend to end up at the spawning area first, and they'll try their best to pair off. You know, there are some limiting factors for brook trout that you might not see in those populations where their systems tend to be a little bit more closed. So those high mountain streams that there's only a few pools available to move up, but they do compete with other species. They also tend to be a little bit more territorial. The interesting thing about salmon species too is the males, it's called a sneaker male. And this tends to be a really small male that will wait for the female to do everything. They'll pair off and then he'll sneak in at the very end and fertilize the eggs before the actual paired male gets in there. Brook trout aren't quite the same, but they use different strategies, to sort of outcompete each other. Generally, I think the largest fish in that area is ultimately going to be the one to make the pair. But if there are a lot of spawning pairs in the area, they may, they sort of, it's something that we don't have a whole lot of information or documentation on, but it's something that, they do.
Yeah, Barry, I and a friend watched an amazing spawning episode among brown trout, and the principal pair were in the range of 24 to 27 inches. And then there were about 3 19 or 20 inch other males in the vicinity. And they were trying to get in on the action. And every once in a while, this alpha male, the 27 incher, would chase the others away and then go back to work. And, I'm sure that occasionally some of those secondary males did get some milt on the egg. So you never know whose kids are the offspring.
Yeah, and those young fish, they're especially the males, they don't really know what's going on yet, so they'll tend to hang out for a while. They also eat the eggs, so as females spawn, they become a food source for those males that might not be quite ready to spawn yet.
Is there any record of mating for life from fish, like other species?
Ooh. Fish, not that I'm aware of. Fish do not tend to pair for life that I'm aware of. But if anybody finds a species that's different for them, mammals are different, but I'm not sure fish do that.
Other questions? Well, this has been fantastic, and I really appreciate the time, Bret, that you've given us this morning, and Ian, your skills in videography are most appreciated, and I'm grateful for the post-production product you're going to put together for us. I will send a link to everyone when that is done. And Clark, really appreciate your contributions. Clark was the one who started to do the research to find the reds that we'd be able to use in this report. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to those of you who participated. It made it very worthwhile for us, and I hope we'll be able to do other projects like this and share them with you. So take care of your streams and stay interested. And if you want to, the Vermont Trout in the Classroom website has a bunch of spawning videos, some of which are really wonderful to see. Some of them have a lot of great underwater photography in them, and I highly recommend them. Anything else for the good of the cause here?
Thanks for doing this, Joe.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Clark.
Joe.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to
Thank
end
you
the
very
meeting.
much.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Fantastic.
All right, BBA Outdoor Adventure you can check out.
Thank you.